Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as we do a simple wire working bracelet. You're going to need some different gauges of wire and you can use a variety of gemstones. So go ahead and look below the video in the description, that little show more button, and look at those details so that way you can get information on all of the materials that were used. Gather up your materials and your supplies and get ready to get started. So to begin, we are using wire cutter, round nose plier, and a needle nose plier. So you want to have those all handy, ready to go. And you are going to be using 16 or 18 gauge wire. So the sample piece here I've made with 16 or with the 18 gauge wire. I'm going to show you how to make it with 16 for a little bit more substantial bracelet. We're beginning with 16 gauge wire in the titanium. And I love this kind of rustic silver color. And I want you to take your cutter and cut two pieces that are each 10 inches long. If you have a large wrist, you might need it to be a little bit longer, but this is going to be plenty long for an 8-inch bangle if you need to make it that big. What we're going to do in addition to that 16 gauge wire is we have some 24 gauge wire. You can use two different colors if you want to make it stand out, gold and silver, or you can keep it all that silver or titanium color. The first thing we're going to do is just use our fingers to kind of round out the wire. I don't want any creases in it, so you can see I'm just kind of taking my time and I'm making it so that they're equal in length. So I have this piece, I'm kind of bending it over, bending it towards the middle, just giving a little pressure because I don't want the sides to be really, really bent. And I'm just bending it over in that fashion. If you want to, you can take something like a Sharpie marker and put a Sharpie marker in the middle and then kind of bend around that. From here, I'm going to take the other piece and do the exact same thing, making sure that my sides equal. And again, I usually just use a little bit of time for this, not a ton of force. If it gets a little bit uneven, you can cut it so it matches. And same thing, going to bend around a Sharpie here and then straighten out my wires so they go straight. You can see I'm pinching in a little bit on the side of the Sharpie. With the 18 gauge, I didn't even use the Sharpie. So now I have these two pieces of wire. And what we're going to do is lock this together. And we are going to begin kind of our bindings and add beads in the middle. I have an 8 millimeter rose quartz that I'll be using for this love one, 4 millimeter rose quartz, and also just for a little bit brighter pop, 4 millimeter of the pink coral as well. So to begin, I want to take my wire, these two pieces, and I'm going to put one inside the other. So how is that done? What you're going to do is take the end of one wire behind the other one and slip that loop through. As you slip that loop through that end, you're going to take the other wire and slip it through the loop on the other side. So you can see here kind of it's a little bit of a game of taking those two wires. You put one inside the other and then look how you get that infinity sign. So you get that infinity sign easily from the middle by bringing those two pieces of wire together. Now you can choose if you want to, like me, to kind of pull it a little bit tighter so that way I'm going to decorate the middle and just keep it open for an 8 millimeter bead. You can see you can pull the 18 gauge wire a lot closer just because of the natural sizes. The 16 is going to be thicker than the 18. Once you have those two linked together, you can kind of stick that down and get ready with some of your 24 gauge wire. When it comes to 24 and working with thinner wire, I usually like to pull off about 8 inches or so, cut that down, and then we're going to get ready to do our side bindings. So the side bindings, the idea is that we are going to be kind of making these two pieces of wire almost like cold fusing them, not actually heating them up, but we're going to bind them together. So we're going to wrap the thinner wire, the 24, around the 16. To wrap the wires, I want you to take your wire here. See how I'm just kind of straightening out that long piece? Take your thin piece of wire, your 24 gauge, and have it go over top of the thicker piece of wire. From here, you're going to coil, wrapping that thinner piece of wire around those two thicker pieces. I've done 3 coils with the right side of the wire. And now I'm going to go back and do 3 coils with the left side. Whatever you do as far as coils, I usually just like to make sure that my sides are consistent. You want the coils to be nice and tight against one another, and also nice and tight against the wire without the wire going over top of itself. As I flip to the back of the design, I cut the wire so that way it ends along the back or where those 2 wires touch one another. The wire that's at the front, same deal. You can either cut it off if it's getting long, or what I'm going to do is just take my needle nose pliers here and tuck it to the back. Once you have one side of your bindings done, you're going to do the other side as well. Prior to doing so, I'm going to take my needle nose pliers, starting at one end, and I'm going to push down on the piece of wire where it crosses over itself, kind of flattening it out and securing it along the side. Flipping over to the opposite side, and this will move along itself. It's supposed to. Flipping over to the other side, I'm going to look about the same distance here. Grab the piece of wire because I still have more, and continue 1, 2, 3 wraps on the right. Going back then and taking that little tail and doing 3 wraps to the left. Once you have those 3 wraps and your sides mimic one another, again, what you want to do is cut those wires to the back of the design. Make sure that your coils are sitting equal distance apart. So you're going to make sure that those coils are sitting correctly. Push them up so they look like they match on either side. And then go in and do that same flattening, starting with one side of the coils and moving towards the other. The reason we're starting with one side of the coil and moving toward the other side is because any extra wire that gets flattened will get pushed then in one direction. So we currently have our side bindings here with our loop in the middle, and then we're going to start our curvature. Now, if you do not want to add any beads, you do not need to add any beads. You can just come to the end and do your clasp and bend your bracelet along so, doing just our hook and eye clasp that we'll be adding on. If you want to add beads, go ahead and continue with us adding the beads, and then we'll get to the end after doing so. So when it comes to adding beads to the middle, there's 2 places that you can go in and create an add. One is by going over the section where the wires cross, connecting the 2. So going right here to this connection point and looping wire around the top and the bottom. The other way to do it is to actually loop wire around the loops here of that top and bottom. That's what I'm going to be doing with an 8mm rose quartz in the middle and then my 2 coral pieces. So again, still using that same piece of 24 gauge wire, I put a bead collection here of 4, 8, 4 on my wire. Now you don't have to have your beads on first, but I put them on just so you could see them. It's easier to wrap and coil without. I'm going to separate those infinite lines a little bit, come over to my loop side here. You'll notice I tucked the wire underneath. Actually, I'm going to take the beads off. So much easier to do. Okay, so I have my wire going underneath that little loop section here. I've put it under just a little bit, and I'm going to take the wire and simply coil it around that loop. So see how it's just right around that outer edge? Tuck the wire underneath. It's just going around the 1 wire, and we're going to do 3 coils of the wire coming through. And notice it's just around 1 piece of wire. So I'm just going 3 coils, folding the wire, bringing it through that loop, kind of off to the side just so I can manage it. And then notice how I take the wire, and then I'm left with those 3 coils along the sides of the wire. From here, I'm going to cut that wire down, make sure that it's kind of towards the middle, and tuck that wire end so that way it doesn't poke on you at all. From here, making sure all those coils are nice into the center. See how it kind of sits up there? Right there, that separate one. Wire is always really hard to show on camera. Now I'm going to put in my bead rotation. So there's my 4, my 8, my 4, which is going to sit in the middle of that infinity sign. From here, you're going to tuck underneath and around the other wire. So this one's a little bit trickier because it's sitting below the upper portion of wire. So what you're going to do is take it and tuck it through the second wire. Push those beads towards the center. And we're going to wrap then on that opposite side. So I'm going to refocus my camera just a little bit so you can get a little bit better view on it. And you can see the wire crossing over here. Pull that wire toward the top and give a nice tight pull. The beads will spin around in there. I want that to happen. We have one coil. We want to make sure whatever direction we're coiling, that we continue to coil in that direction. I don't like when my wire crosses over one another. So from here, see how I have that wire there connecting the two? That's 2 loops. Going to come through. It's just, again, connecting to just one wire. Coming through again. And then, once again, pulling that wire, turning it over, cutting the wire down close, and then taking your chain nose or needle nose pliers and just kind of pinching down and pulling up the wire. So now you have this nice beaded middle of your bracelet. Your wires are all along the side. You have your beads in the middle. And now we're going to add some beads to the sides. So to add the beads to the side, we're just going to separate out our side wires just a tiny little bit on either side. You can do one side at a time if you want. And I try to make sure to keep these kind of going straight as well, because we don't want our piece to turn at all. We're going to be doing the same wrapping technique with more of our 24 gauge wire. So again, about 8 inches. I'm going to take the wire, and the first thing we're going to do is wrap to the top bar. So we're going to take here, we're going to be wrapping from the left toward the right, wrapping around once, twice, just on that top wire, and then I'll go back and I'll wrap and coil one time around the top here. Pushing those together, you'll see basically 3 coils along the side. We're going to get ready to add our first bead in there. If you've ever done leather wrap jewelry, this is very similar to working with a thread and needle. This time we're just working with wire. We put a bead on the wire. We go to the wire at the bottom now because we've started the wire on the top. And we're going to wrap the wire around once and twice, making sure that its coils are nice and together along the bottom. Picking up my alternate 4, which is going to be my rose quartz. Take your rose quartz, put it onto your thinner wire. It's going to sit a little bit of a diagonal, but you want to make sure that it's not too separated out. See how I'm kind of bringing them closer together. Take your wire, coil once along the top there and twice along that top wire. See how the wires kind of got separated, and I'm just using my fingernail. You can use a pliers or a fingernail. Give a nice tight pull. Don't be afraid to pull your 24 gauge wire. So from here, we have 2 beads on there. I'm going to go back to my coral, and I'll add 5 beads on each side. So back to my coral here, going from the top then to the bottom, wrapping around once, pushing it right up next to where it is, wrapping it twice. And then as you pull and as it's wrapped twice, kind of push those coils together, time to add your next bead. You're going to do this on both sides of the infinity sign. So I'm going over there. You can see that bead gets added. Push that wire up next to the bead 2 times around for consistency. Now, if you want the beads to sit more straight rather than on a diagonal, you can always wrap 4 or 5 times. That's completely up to you. Going to go in then, add my last bead. And after I add this last bead, I have my 1 and my second wrap here going around. When I get to the outer edge here, I'm going to bring those 2 wires together, and we're going to use that same wire that we're working with to coil and wrap the wires together like we did on the opposite side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pushing those bindings together. And you can see then how you're getting that kind of look of it opened and closed. Go back, trim down that extra little wire there, tuck it into your project, go to the other side here, cut down the wire toward the back of the project, go in then and flatten out your wire. You'll still have wire at the end here of the 16 gauge. to use towards your clasp. Going to go to the other side now and do the exact same pattern of my coral and my rose quartz. Now that you have your side beads on here, you can see how they match and how it looks from the front. It's time to do our clasp. One clasp side is just going to be a loop here that's going to go into, or a hook here that's going to go into a loop. I'm going to do the loop side first. So it doesn't really matter which side is which, but I'm going to take those two pieces of wire and I'm going to grab my pen again and I'm going to bend the two pieces of wire around in a swooping method around my pen. So I'm not going in and making this like super, super tight around the pen, just that nice swooping method. From here, I'm going to take these thicker wires and I'm going to bend them around that base line. And the 18 gauge, if you've never worked with wire before, 18 is a great one to start out with because you don't need to have as many plier skills because it's thinner so you can bend it more easily with your hand. Now I want these wires at the top to end right at that coil section. So I'm just going to push them down, 1 and 2 along the edge there, making sure that when I flatten them here, that they're not going to poke any sort of clothing or jewelry that I may be wearing. On the opposite side here now, it's time to make my hook that this is going to go into. So the hook that it's going to go into, very, 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 very simple. I'm going to take, once again, that pen. We're going to bend the wire around the pen and see how it's just that hook right there, just that eye. And we're going to take that piece of wire here and we're going to take a piece of the 24 gauge, 1, 2, 3, 4 coils, making sure those coils end to the back of that wire. I'm just going to pull that one up a little bit, making sure it ends to the back. Push that around. And you've learned all these coiling skills, so don't be intimidated by this. You're just going in there. You're going to grab your round nose plier now, right on the edge where you can see it but you can't feel it. And you are going to bend these two wires back into a little round loop. You can then, if you want to, flatten them down a tiny bit and close them up to make the hook. From here, you can, if you want to, do another little binding along the end just for the look, or binding along the side here if you're doing two different colors. But at this point, you're finished. I like to take this and turn it a little bit to the side. I think that makes it easier to hook on and to clasp to. Same with this loop here. I'll put my pen back in and literally I'll just turn it about 45 degrees to the side. And then when I go to put my bracelet on, I have my nice hook and eye along the back and I have my nice infinite love to the front. You can make these in all different sizes, all different patterns, adding beads, not adding beads, adding a different clasp if you don't like the big one. So many different options when you create these nice wire bangles out of 16 or 18 gauge. Thanks so much for joining me making this infinite wire bracelet. It's really fun to go in and play with different materials, different gauges of wire, add beads here and there, or keep it with no beads at all. You can really make it yours. Any changes that you make sure to put in the comments below and really help out other Potomac beaders that may be watching. As always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching and stay tuned for more inspirational designs.